All right, Rabbi, say good morning. Let us begin. Beautiful daf ahead of us today. Beginning by thanking our sponsors for this morning share. To thank our TALMUD Torah sponsors for the month of Teves. The Daf Yomi Shiur in memory of Mr. Milton Marder, Mordechai Dovid ben Rephael HaKohen, and the Elbaum Mishpacha in commemoration of the yahrzeit of Gerald Elbaum, Yaakov Kopel ben R Avraham Menachem. We hope that in the merit of our TALMUD Torah, the neshama have an aliyah, and the families a neshama. Also, with that, let us begin. So we have a great daf ahead of us today. Today's daf is pay base 82. We are in Yahrzeit Hashem picking up. We left off yesterday. I want to say, Mantana. Shabbos says actually it's 2, 4, 6, 7 lines up from the bottom. So Mantana hadisanya dvarim hamutarim v'achirim na'aguban iser iataroshe linag bahen heter kidei levatlan. Shabbos says it's actually a very interesting case. The Gemara says as follows: who is the opinion who states the following idea? Dvarim hamutarim. Shabbos says this means something that is mutter, practices that are mutter. But I go to a community where people are machmir. So literal translation over here. So let's say I live in city A, and in city A we do certain practices. I go to city B, and in city B they're machmir, and they do not engage in those same practices. I should not act in a permissive fashion in the presence of those who act in a prohibited fashion. I will say, the truth is, this halacha actually has many different ramifications and applications. I'll give you just one that comes up contemporarily all of the time. Let's say again, you are a Jew who lives in Eretz Yisrael, and you come to Chutz La'aretz, you come to outside of Eretz Yisrael, and now we know that the halacha is in Eretz Yisrael, they don't have Yom Tov Sheni, they don't have the second day Yom Tov. In Chutz La'aretz, we do observe it. So remember again, as an Eretz Yisrael Jew, there are certain things that you do not have to go ahead and observe on Yom Tov Sheni. That being said, you are not permitted in a public fashion to go ahead and not observe the second day of Yom Tov. There's a concept of having respect for the minhag hamakom, having respect in general for, because I remember that, no stories, we have to win, this is where we never get through the daf. Okay, and then so we'll say, so therefore, but if you look at the Rush has an interesting application of this, or an interesting explanation of this. The Rush says, Dvarim hamutarim. So I'll say, if you look at the Rush on the left-hand column, the first wide line. See, he says like this: Dvarim hamutarim sheyotim shehem mutarin ulahachmir nagu bahen iser. So tzrichen hatara midrabanan. So we'll say the way the Rush understands this is as follows: if in a particular place they've accepted upon themselves certain behaviors as a chumrah, as a stringency, so they know that what they are doing is really permitted, but they've accepted upon themselves certain stringencies. The Rush says that at the end of the day, tzrichin hatara. If now the community wants to go ahead and stop observing this stringency, they require hataras nedarim. They need to treat it as if it's a revocation of a vow. Shelo yavo lezalzel b'dvarim ha'asurim. So I will say, this is very interesting. So what according to the Rush, what's happening over is as follows. Pashat pshat is that this is a concept on the visitor to a community. You go to a community, the community conducts itself a certain way. Be respectful of communal norms, even if you yourself don't normally observe that norm. The Rush says, no, we must teach you something different. If I live in a community, and ultimately, again, the community accepted upon itself certain chumras, the community knows these chumras are not halacha, they're chumras. Now the community decides we don't want to observe those chumras anymore. They need hataras nedarim. But what if they didn't take it upon themselves as a neder? They still need hataras nedarim. Why? So that they should understand, because we're afraid if they could just stop the practice like cold turkey, just stop doing it without any mechanism of revocation, they'll come to treat other usher matters in a light-hearted way as well. Therefore, in order to safeguard real isurim, any communal practice that has been adopted and then wants to be unadopted, that's the word, right? Unadopted, halach l'maisa needs hataras nedarim. Very interesting. So finish the Rush. He says, Shelo yavo lezalzel b'dvarim ha'asurim. Fine. So the Gemara says, who is the opinion who says this? So the Gemara says, because the pasuk says, Lo yachal dvar, shouldn't profane your word. Davar acher, lo yachal dvaro. What does it mean lo yachal dvar? Mikan l'tam tchacham shein mefer nidre atzmo. Other opinion was lo yachal dvaro min, that ultimately a chacham cannot go ahead. A chacham cannot go ahead and annul his own vow. So we'll see whose opinion is reflected over here. Money, Rabbi Gamliel. Now we'll see this is Rabbi Gamliel. Now remember again, we had Rabbi Gamliel in yesterday's daf. Right? Remember again, what did Rabbi Gamliel say? If a wife takes a neder that she is not going to make her husband's bed, she's not going to go ahead and pour him his cup of wine, or she's not going to wash his hands, face, and feet. Right? So what's the halacha? What's the halacha? Does the husband need to annul such a neder like that? No. Why? Because ultimately, again, she's halachically bound to do those things. Rabbi Gamliel said that halacha l'maisa, he should annul it. Right? Why should he annul it? So Rabbi Gamliel says, out of a concern, right, he should annul it. So we'll say Rabbi Gamliel is of the opinion that even things, now what's Rabbi Gamliel's whole chap? Why does he say annul it? Because if you don't annul it, she's going to come to treat Nedarim lightly. So Rabbi Gamliel is of the opinion that sometimes we subject a particular neder to a revocation or to an annulment process, even though what? Even though it doesn't need hatara, lest you come to treat Nedarim lightly. So therefore, in this case where the community accepted a practice, even if they didn't accept it as a neder, and now they want to unaccept that practice, it requires some form of hatara in order to safeguard the seriousness of nedarim. Very interesting. So the Gemara goes weiter. So it's an interesting case over here. So Rava asked Rav Nachman the following question. Tashmish shamita l'rabbanan inui nefeshu o dvarim shebeino lebeina. We'll say a very interesting case. What happens if halacha l'maisa, a woman makes a neder not to engage in tashmish shamita? Now remember again, in order for that neder to take hold, it would have to be phrased as, remember, how does she have to phrase it? She has to phrase it as, I make a neder to prohibit the benefit or the pleasure of bia upon myself. Right? Because if she prohibits herself onto her husband, then ultimately, again, she's making a neder that runs contrary to her biblical, to their obligation to one another. So therefore, she can ask it upon herself. So now the Gemara says as follows. So if a neder for tashmish shamita, is that considered to be inoi nefesh, or is that dvarim shebeino lebeino? Now we'll say, what's the nafkamina? Let's go back. What's the nafkamina? Right. Good. So remember again, if it's inoi nefesh, then when he is matir it, or I should say husband is made for it, when the husband is made for it, what's the nature of that afara? Forever. If it's dvarim shebeino lebeino, then ultimately the hafara only works as long as what? They're married. Once they're no longer married, ultimately, because remember again, I will say, when it comes to dvarim shebeino lebeino, remember again, the phrase we coined was, when a husband is made for dvarim shebeino lebeino, what is it? It's really neder suppression. It's neder suppression. So the neder is suppressed as long as there's a marital bond. Once the marital bond dissolves, the neder comes back, as opposed to inui nefesh, which is literal, complete annulment of the neder. So that's the shayla. A neder tashmish shamita, is that inui nefesh, or is that dvarim shebeino lebeino? Amar latini suah. So we learn this. What do we learn this? Unetula ani min haYehudim. So I will say this is actually interesting. Look at the rush. So last rush on the page. So I will say literally again, the neder she's making is, I make a neder that I am removed from the Jewish people. Now what does that mean? A neder that I'm removed from the Jewish people? Look at the rush. Mufreshes ani mikala Yehudim she'asra hanaas tashmisham aleha. So I will say, so the way we understand this neder is, she's making a neder not to have relations with any Jew. That's her neder, right? So she's prohibiting the benefit or the pleasure of tashmish with any Jew upon herself. That's what I'm removed from the Jewish people. So it's not a theological statement. It's literally like a bia, like a physical statement. Okay, so what's talach in such a situation? We'll say tav of peibeis, yafer chelko umishamashto. Husband has the ability to go ahead and annul his part of that, because obviously, again, he's included in the Jewish people as well. She annuls his part ultimately, and it's permitted to have relations with her. So the Gemara says, Utehei netula mina Yehudim. And I was going to take a look at, actually not yet. So the Gemara says, V'i amrit neder inui nefesh havi. So I say, if you hold that a neder of bia, a neder of tashmish, is inui nefesh, I'm sorry, I didn't. Yafer chalko mishamashto utehei netula mina Yehudim. So I say, what happens in this kind of case? What happens in this case? Husband annuls his chelek. That allows him to have intimacy with his wife. And we'll say, ultimately, what happens to the rest of her neder? It's intact. It's intact. Which again, I want to point out, obviously when she's married, it doesn't make all that much of a difference. But Lamaisa, should she become widowed or divorced, makes a lot of difference. Because now she has a neder prohibiting herself to relations to any other Jew. So what's going on over here? V'i amrit neder inui nefesh havi. They both say, now the fact that the way the Gemara understands this is how. Husband could annul his chelik of the neder, but the rest of the neder remains intact. What does that tell you? If you tell me that tashmish is inui nefesh, amai teine tula minei Yehudim. They both say, if tashmish, the neder about tashmish was inui nefesh, then what happens when the husband annuls it? What should happen? The entire neder should be annulled. The fact that ultimately, again, the husband could only annul his part, what does that tell you? Shmamina dvarim shebeino lebeino havyon. I will say, what does that tell you? That tells you that a neder regarding tashmish shamita ultimately, again, is dvarim shebeino lebeino. And I will say, what happens with dvarim shebeino lebeino? Ultimately, again, this means a husband has the ability to annul his part. And how long can he annul his part for? For the marriage. Right? But once the marriage is over, ultimately the rest of the neder comes into effect. So I will say, I just want to point out, there's two things happening over here. Number one, we're constantly reinforcing this distinction between the Nedarim of Inui Nefesh versus the Nedarim of Dvarim Shebeino Lebeina. Inui Nefesh, afflictive deprivation neder, husband has the ability to annul it, and it's annulled forever. Dvarim shebeino lebeina, so a neder that impacts their marital status or their marital relationship, ultimately husband could suppress it for the duration of the marriage, but once the marriage is over, it appears that neder really comes back. We're now also going to begin to put things in each of the categories, which begins to go into the Gemara over here is Tashmish Shamita. It does not fall into Inui Nefesh, but rather Tashmish Shamita falls into Dvarim Shebeino Lebeino. And therefore, Allah L'maisa, if she makes and it's very interesting, so if she makes a neder, not to have relations with any Jew, essentially what he could do is, he could be made for his chelek. But the rest of the neder still remains in effect. Incredible. So the Gemara says, "Rabbanan tibaylecha mishum dinetulani min Yehudim." So I will say, ultimately, again, and according to the Rabbanan, what do we do with this particular case? To which the Gemara says, "Rabbi Yossi katanila dam Rav Huna kulei pirkin Rabbi Yossihi." So I will say, according to the Rabbanan, what you'll have to say is that this entire section is reflective of the position of Rabbi Yossi. So the Gemara says, where do we know this from? Kevan diktani Rabbi Yossi omer ein elu ela nidre inui nefesh lama leisula misni harize yafet de Rabbi Yossi. Shavuot, since the last Mishnah ended by saying Rabbi Yossi says these are not nidre inui nefesh. Shavuot said this is the first Mishnah in the parak, and then it goes back and it says harize yafet de Rabbi Yossi. It goes to Rabbi Yossi again. What does it teach us? Shmamina mikan ve'elach Rabbi Yossi. Ultimately, again, it comes to teach us that halacha l'maisa, the rest of this statement, the rest of this section is reflective of the view of Rabbi Yossi. Also, if you take a look at Tosas for just a moment, Tosas is in the left-hand margin. So Tosas writes over here, "L'Rabbanan tibaylecha umasnisin dinetula ani min Yehudim Rabbi Yossi katanila." So also, according to the Rabbanan, this brisa, or the Mishnah, of Netula Ani Min HaYehudim, when she makes a neder saying that I'm removed from the Jewish people, according to the Rabbanon, that is going to be reflective of the position of Rabbi Yossi. Dilididei Pshita Didvarim Shebeino Lebeina Havu. So it's like, all the Gemara is trying to set up is how would the Rabbanon understand this? The Rabbanon would understand the reflective of the position of Rabbi Yossi. Fine. I will say, now remember again, that's because going back, there is a fundamental machlokes in Rabbi Yossi and the Rabbanon, or Rabbi Yossi and the Tanakama, about how to define Nidre Inui Nefesh, like we saw in the first Mishnah. Beautiful. Amar Shmuel Moshe de Levi. Well, so here we go. So Shmuel said the name of Levi, Kol Nedarim Bal Mefer Leishto. In general, the husband has the ability to annul any of his wife's Nedarim. Now I will say, with a couple of caveats. Now, the truth is, that statement we've already seen, is not, it's a true statement, but it's a true statement with a number of caveats. Remember, what type of Nedarim can a husband be made for his wife? What kind of Nedarim? Either A, Inui Nefesh, or Dvarim Shebeino Lebeino. So the Gemara, so now the Gemara is going to say, let's give some examples of Nedarim that he can't annul. So watch this. Chutz min hanaasi al ploni she'ena mefer. So let's listen to this. Let's say Reuven's married to Rachel, right? And Rachel makes a neder, right? Rachel makes a, what's her neder? Her neder is, I'm not going to give any hana to Leah. To Leah. So does husband have the right to go ahead and annul that neder? The answer is no. Why not? It's not inui nefesh, and it has nothing to do with their marriage. So again, therefore, husband doesn't have the right of annulment. Aval hanas ploni alai mefer. So this is very interesting. However, what can he do? If Rachel says, I prohibit Leah from giving any benefit to me, that the husband can be mefer. That he can be mefer. Now we'll say, now what's the logic over there? Take a look at the Rush. Rush is now in the right-hand column. So the Rush says, Aval hanas ploni alai mefer, dahavi inui nefesh, shemet titztarich mimenu. Because we'll say, logically, what's the idea over here? If Rachel, right, Reuven is married to Rachel. Rachel makes a neder. The neder is, so again, if she makes a neder, Rachel says, I'm not going to give any hana to Leah. So does Reuven, the husband, have the ability to annul that neder? No. Why? Because again, it doesn't fall into either one of the two categories. However, if Rachel says, I take a neder not to get any hana from Leah, Reuven can annul that neder. Why? Because it could be that Rachel will need Leah for something, and now she's not able to get hana from Leah, and therefore it's called inui nefesh. Now, the chiddush is, even though right now it's not afflictive in nature, right now Rachel doesn't need anything from Leah, but Lamaisa, she may need something from Leah, and now she won't be able to get something from Leah because of the neder. Therefore, that's called afflictive, inui nefesh, and therefore Reuven can annul it. Incredible. So the Gemara questions this. The Gemara says, interesting. Tanan, Peros Medina zu alai. Yavilam Deches. We'll say, this is our Mishnah. What did our Mishnah say? Rachel made a neder that I hereby prohibit upon myself any fruit from the state of Maryland. So what's talacha? Reuven can't annul that neder. Why can't he annul the neder? Yavilam dinacheres. Because she can get fruit from another state. Let her get from Delaware. Right? Let her get from Delaware. So Amra Yosef, to Amra Shetavi. So we'll say, so here's what's interesting. So I will say, now again, based on what we just said, if Rachel makes a neder not to give hana to Leah, so we said Reuven can't annul it. But if Rachel makes a neder not to receive hana from Leah, Reuven can annul it because she may need something. So based on that, I will say, if Rachel makes a neder not to get benefit, not to eat fruit from Maryland, right? So what should be the halacha? So the Mishnah said, husband can't annul it. Why? Let her get fruit from Pennsylvania. But based on what we just said, what should be the halacha? Husband should be able to annul it because maybe she'll need fruit from Maryland for some reason. So why can't husband annul that? To which the Gemara says, I'm sorry, Amrav Yosef to Amra Shetavi. Very interesting, I will say. So now, very interesting qualification over here. So the Gemara says, what's the case? I'm sorry, I keep losing the place. So Rabbi Yosef says, what's the case? Shetavi. Rabbi Yosef, the neder she made was, I hereby make, so Rachel's married to Reuven. The neder was, Reuven, I make a neder that you, Reuven, cannot bring me fruits from Maryland. Okay. So Rabbi Yosef, what did she prohibit in this case? What did she prohibit? Reuven bringing fruit from Maryland. Did she prohibit fruit from Maryland? No. Only the particular situation of Reuven bringing fruit from Maryland. So that's the kind of case I will say where the truth is, Reuven can't revoke that. There's no hafara in that case. Why is there no hafara in that case? Because Lamaisa, it's not inui nefesh, and it's not darim shebino lebeino. It's not inui nefesh because even if she needs fruit from Maryland, she can get it. She just can't get it from her husband. So such a specific neder like that, he does not have the ability to go ahead and revoke. We'll say, if you take a look at the Rush again, so the Rush says, actually you could just take a look at the Ran. The Ran, will say, is right in the left-hand column over here. Dika Amra Shetavi Ata, Kigon Dika Amra, Peros Medina Zu Alai Im Tiviem Ata. So the neder she made is, Reuven, I will not get any better, right? You cannot bring me fruit from Maryland. Aval Kishiavim Acher Lo Asatam Aliyah. If someone else brings the fruit, it's totally permitted for her to consume it. So since there's a way for her to get Maryland produce, al yidei acher, lo dami lahanas ploni alai de les leitakana lehanas meosa ploni. Fine. So I will say, so therefore, halacha l'maisa, because there is a way for her to get produce from Maryland, ultimately, okay, her husband can't bring it, but anyone else can bring it. Therefore, this is not an annullable neder. Incredible. So Gemara says, Tashma, let's analyze. So Peiros chen v'ni za'alai en yochel hafer. So say another. Remember again, what did we see in the Mishnah? Let's say again, she says, I'm not going to eat any I take a neder. I'm not going to eat any produce from Shimon's makolet, right? From Shimon's store. So what's the halacha? What did the Mishnah say? Reuven, the husband, can't annul that neder because let her get fruit from somewhere else. Based on this, I will say, but what we've learned is that halacha l'maisa, Reuven should be able to annul that neder. Hachanami deka'amra shetavi ata. So we'll say, remember again, what's the case? We're sitting up the same way. The case is where she says, so I'm taking a neder that Reuven, my husband, you can't bring me produce from Shimon's supermarket. Okay. So that's not an annullable neder. Why? She's not prohibiting the produce of the supermarket upon herself. She's prohibiting a very specific thing. So that's not annullable by the neder, by the husband, because it's not inui nefesh and it's not dvarim shebino lebena. But in Achinami, had she gone ahead and said, I take a neder not to eat any produce from Reuven's store, it sounds like, based on what we're learning now, that husband would have the ability to annul that. So says the Gemara. Let's analyze. Lo haisa parnasasa elimimeno hareze yafer. Yet the Mishnah said, if, however, again, Reuven, the husband, had an arrangement with Shimon. What's the arrangement? That Shimon is the only one who extends credit to Reuven, then this would be an annullable neder. The amrita ka'amra shetavi ata. But if we're talking about a case where Lamaisa, again, she said the neder she's making is Reuven, my husband, you can't bring me any produce from Shimon's store, right? Amai yafer. Then ultimately, again, still, why should Reuven be able to annul it? Even if Shimon is the only guy who could extend credit, that's fine. In other words, she can still get produce from Shimon. The only thing she prohibited is that her husband, Reuven, can't bring it to her. So there are other ways in which she could obtain the produce. If that's the case, then why is it an annullable neder? Ella midaseifa de lo maisi bal havi reisha de kamaisihi. I will say, so what we have to say is, since the seifa is not a case ultimately, again, the lo maisi bal, where the husband can't bring it, therefore, again, the reisha must be a case of where she herself is bringing it. That's the case. Ella reisha ein yachal lahaver. But 1 second, but rather, again, I will say, the reisha is a case where the neder is not annullable. Vid kamaisihi. And we're talking about a case where she would be bringing it herself. I will say, Amadeus, Umasnisin Rabbi Yosihi. Rather, what you have to say is, the Mishnah reflects the view of Rabbi Yoti. Dam Rav Huna, Kule Pirkin Rabbi Yosihi. The entire Mishnah ultimately, or the entire Perek, reflects the view of Rabbi Yosi. Umay ein yachal lahaver. And what does it mean ultimately that he has the inability to be made for the neder? Mishum inui nefesh. And what Rabbi Yossi consistently means when he says that halacha l'maisa, you can't be made for the neder, it means you can't be made for the neder on the grounds of inui nefesh. But what can you do? Aval mefer nedarim shebeino lebeina. But you do have the ability ultimately to be made for nedarim, to annul nedarim, that again impact the marital bond. So I will say, so if you bring this all together, so what do we have? So we'll say, I'm going to point you in the direction of the Rambam Hilchos Nedarim Perek Yud Beis. Now the truth is, it's halachos Aleph, Beis, and Gimel that are important. But I just want to quote to you specifically in halacha Aleph. What the Rambam goes ahead and outlines is as follows: husband has revocatory power in 2 buckets of Nedarim, 2 types of Nedarim. Right? This we've established. Inui nefesh, afflictive, and dvarim shebeino lebeina. In halacha Beis, here's what the Rambam writes: Ma bein nedarim sheish ban inui nefesh dvarim shebeino lebeina. So we'll say, wherein lies the distinction between the husband's revocatory power in inui nefesh nedarim versus dvarim shebeino lebeina? So here it is: Sha nedarim sheish ban inui nefesh mefer el atzmo vi el achirim v'shebeino lebeina liatzmo mefer la'achirim eno mefer. So we'll say, this is what we've established. In Inui Nefesh Nedarim, husband has the ability to blanket hafara, blanket revocation. He revokes it for everyone. Good. When it comes to Dvarim Shebeino Lebeina, he only has the ability to be mefer his portion, but doesn't have the ability to annul the neder for anyone else. Right? So for example, I will say, Ketzad. So I'm just going to now this halacha gimel. Nadr shlo lechol basar. So we'll say, let's say for example, she makes a neder, she's not going to eat meat. Right? Mefer la. So we'll say, so remember again. So what's not eating meat? What bucket would you put that in? Inui nefesh. So mefer la. B'tziyah muteres lechol imkol adam liolam. So we'll say, here's a good example, right? So she makes a neder not to eat meat. We're going to call that inui nefesh. He annuls the neder on the day that he hears it. He annuls the neder. What's her halacha? She could eat meat at any time with any person. Conversely, the Ram says, "Asra la tashmish kol adam sheba olam." And we'll say, what happens if she makes a neder? This is Gemara's case. As she makes a neder, I'm not going to have relations with Nutula ani minei Yehudim. I'm never going to have relations with any Jew. So we'll say, what's the halacha? So in that case, Yafer Chelko, ultimately, he could annul the neder as it applies to him, his portion of the neder, and he can have relations with her. Ukishayamos o yigashena harehi asura b'tashmish kol adam. But so we'll say again, if he divorces her or he dies, she now has a neder. She has a neder prohibiting her from having relations with any Jewish man. Right, harehi asura kol adam b'chein ki yotzei bazeh. So we'll say. So here the Rambam outlines this case. Now again, I want to point out: does she have an out from this neder? Does she have an out? Yeah, what does she have to do? Right? Okay, she has to go to a chacham, whatever it is, charata, pesach, whatever it's going to be. Right? So she has an out. So we'll say the point, and this is the point that Rambam is making over here. We'll say two types of neder that can be annulled. Fundamental distinction: inui nefesh, blanket annulment forever. Dar shebeino lebeina. Again, ultimately he could annul his chelek. But if she makes a more overarching neder, he can't impact the part that applies to any other person. So therefore, upon death or divorce, ultimately that neder comes back. So incredible.
This case?
No, it's any case. It's any case. The Rambam just giving, again, remember the Rambam can't go through every case. So what he's just going to try to do is just give you examples. So the paradigmatic example of inui nefesh is going to be a neder not to eat meat. Right, and the paradigmatic example of dvarim shebeino lebeino will be tashmish. But then it's up to us, or it's up to the Gemara, to kind of fill up the list as we go along. But now we have our categories. Let's go back there. Let's say interesting case. I'm ready with the Shmuel. Nojar mishteki karos. So this is a very interesting case. Rachel, right? Rachel's married to Reuven, and what does she do? Rachel goes ahead and makes a neder. Prohibiting herself from getting benefit from two loaves. Okay? Now what happens? Ba'achas misana, ba'achas in misana. One of the loaves, abstaining from eating one of the loaves is inui nefesh, and one of the loaves is not. Now what does that mean? This is very interesting. Take a look at the Ran for just a moment. The Ran is in the widest lines, 2, 4, 5 lines in. Right? So Rachel has 2 loaves of bread in front of her. She says, these 2 loaves are prohibited unto me. Fine. Ba'achas misana she pas nekiya, u'ba'achas ein misana she pas kiba. So we'll say, so for example, so what happens? One of the loaves is made from fine flour, and one of the loaves is made from coarse flour. I mentioned before, like the irony is, like all of the artisanal breads or whole wheat breads or all this stuff. Like these fancy loaves of bread. They look like they fell on the floor and rolled around a couple of times. They have everything in it in different colors and this, that. So it's interesting from the Gemara's perspective. Right, no one would ever touch that with a 10-foot pole. Right, so today you're paying premium dollar for it. And so it's interesting. So let's say a woman has 2 loaves of bread in front of her. One is fine flour bread. The other was literally like a whole wheat loaf. Right, no one was eating whole wheat bread. So let's say so now one of them abstaining from it represents inui nefesh. The other one, she could care less about. She wouldn't eat it anyway. So we'll say, so hear what's happening over here? So the neder encompasses both loaves. But really, abstaining from one of them is inui nefesh. Abstaining from the other, it doesn't matter. There's no inui nefesh in it. So watch this. So the Gemara says, listen to this. So we'll say, so now what's going to happen? So we'll say, so now what's the shaila? What is the husband's hafara power in this case? Because one of them is inui nefesh, one of them is not. So does that mean he only has the power to annul her neder vis-a-vis one of the loaves, but not the other? So the Gemara says, mitoch shehu mefer lemisana, mefer lemishe'ina misana. So we'll say the Gemara says, essentially, because both those are part of one neder, since he has the ability to annul the neder vis-a-vis one loaf, he effectively has the ability to annul the neder for what? 2 loaves. Which we'll say is another way of saying it's one neder. So once you have the ability to annul part of the neder, we'll say, remember, this is part of another corollary which we've seen. What's the other corollary? Neder shehuter miktsasa huter kula. You can't revoke or annul part of a neder. So once you annul or revoke part of it, the entire neder is annulled. So this is the same application over here, which essentially means once he has the power to annul the neder because of the loaf that does represent inui, he has the power to annul the neder for the other loaf, even though she could care less. So the Gemara says, "Rahasi, Am Rav Yochanan, mefer lemisana ve'in mefer lemishein lemisana." We'll say, "Machlokes." Rav Asi name Rav Yochanan. No, not true. He only has the power to annul the neder vis-a-vis the loaf that she cares about, but does not have the power to annul to annul for the loaf she doesn't care about. Okay, so we'll say, imachlokes. So the Ika de Amri, we'll say, is an alternate version of this, which frames the machlokes a little bit differently. We'll say, so in the Ika de Amri, in the alternate version, the conversation is just framed in a different way. Rav Asi asked Rav Yochanan, Nadra mishteki karos, right? A woman made a neder to abstain from 2 loaves of bread. Ba'achos misana, and we'll say it's one neder. Ba'achos misana, ba'achos misana. One of the loaves, abstaining from eating it, really represents inui nefesh, but the second loaf does not. So Mahu, what is the halacha? What is the halacha? Namely, again, what does the husband have the power to do? To which we'll say in this version, Rabbi Yochanan responded, Amar lei, mefer lemisana, ve'ein misafra l'she'in misana. Husband has the ability to annul the neder vis-a-vis the loaf. Ultimately, again, that vis-a-vis the loaf that she wants, or that she would desire, that's inui nefesh, but doesn't have the ability to annul it for the loaf that's not inui nefesh. Rabbi say, so 2 versions. In the second version of Rabbi say, there's no machlokas. Right, in the second version of this discussion, Rav Asi asks Rabbi Yochanan the question, and Rabbi Yochanan answers the question, and there's no other opinion here. In the first version, there's 2 opinions. The Tanakama, the first of the Rabbanon say that no, once you could annul the neder for the loaf she wants, you could annul it even for the loaf that she doesn't want. And Rabbi Yochanan argues and says no, he can only go ahead and annul it for the loaf that she wants. Okay, so 2 versions of us. We're going to stop over here for today. So I'm leaving you off on this machlokes. So again, we leave off in the middle of this machlokes because again, the truth is the Gemara then goes really the rest of the daf as the answer to this question tomorrow's daf. So we'll get to that tomorrow. But I'm leaving you on this cliffhanger about a neder that encompasses 2 parts. One part is inui nefesh. One part is not inui nefesh. What is the husband's revocatory power in such a neder? We'll stop here. Let's do a little Mesilas Yesharim together. What's a day without Mesilas Yesharim, right? What's the Mesilas Yesharim? Good.